Brother, it's such a treat to be with my friend Patrick Eley. Patrick, you've been a chiropractor, you've been a trader, you're a stand-up comedian, you train with the legendary Nate Diaz, and you're the host of one of my favorite podcasts, the Patrick Eley Podcast. So it's such a treat. I know we've been talking about this for a while, but I'm so excited to chat to you.
Thanks for having me.
So, brother, when I met you in Chicago, you were a chiropractor, and I want to tell you a story. I don't think I've told you this. When I was a trader, I had this awful, before I went off on my own, I had this awful boss, and he made my life hell. And every time I did a good trade, he would scream at me, why didn't you do more? And every time I did a trade he didn't like, he would scream at me, he didn't like it. And the ironic thing was he was a horrible trader himself. He only lost money. He was terrible, but he was my boss, so I couldn't say anything. And I hated my life so much. I remember going to the bathroom stall and taking out my trading sheets, and on the back, I was writing down, okay, how many days do I have to deal with this absolute piece of shit to get 2 bonuses? And then I was going to leave and I was going to go to chiropractor school in LA. So, because I had all these neck issues, and I went to see this chiropractor in Chicago, and I had so much relief. I was like, man, maybe I should change career and be a chiropractor. So it ended up never happening, but I'm so impressed by you in the sense that I know you've done things before you became a chiropractor, but man, that's a lot of education to do that. And I'd love to know why, but you changed careers. And it's so hard. Like, I know so many people would have such a hard time leaving that behind when they've invested so much in it. So I just give you so much respect for making that decision.
Well, that's nice of you to say. It was not an easy thing to decide to do, nor was it an easy thing to actually do,
right,
as far as transitioning. I definitely had some advantages in that. For instance, I didn't have children that I needed to be paying for their private school or something like that. So I was in a position in life where I could still take some chances relative to most people, because I stopped practicing when I was around 30.
Well, I got to say, Pat, some of my favorite people are people like you that have had, I've had 3 different careers. I'm 44. So I just think it's so great that there's nothing sadder than someone that's stuck to something and they've kind of outgrown it, or they've lost all the passion, but they still do it just to get a paycheck. And there's nothing more inspiring for me than seeing someone like you who's now all in with comedy. And like, what a change from a chiropractor in California, in Chicago, to comedian in California. That's quite the change.
Life is strange. I couldn't have made it up.
Well, Pat, listen, you were just talking before we started, and I said, wait, please hold your thought because I want to record this. I love your podcast, and I know you do have guests sometimes and you talk to people, but a lot of them are solo episodes. And man, yes, I love listening to you because you always give me different viewpoints on things, and you make me think. And a lot of the time, I think you go in a certain direction, and then you go a different way. And so I really enjoy it. And having done podcasts with people, it is incredibly hard to do a solo episode, and you do so many and you do it so well. I would love to talk about, why you started your podcast and how it's evolved.
Sure. I started the podcast back in the day in Chicago. I had a podcast called the Feedcast, and it was all about basically promoting my health and my chiropractic business. I wanted to get into working one-on-one with people more as like a health coach before health coach became the silly thing that people pay a couple $100 on the internet to get a certification in. But I would talk about all things health and bring guests from different disciplines on. So I had a little bit of experience with podcasting. And when I decided to start this current iteration, because I had done away with that when I got out of the health industry, I wanted to put out some information that I had spent a lot of money getting as far as my background with school. And that way it wasn't just personally, to me, it wasn't just all lost. Like I was doing something with it. And one of the things that really bothers me about the health space in terms of podcasting stuff is how derivative it becomes very quickly. And it, to me, as somebody with a background in fixing people, helping them with their health, to me, it like very clearly becomes just a marketing device. Like they're just repeating the same information over and over. We obviously have developments within health and wellness and sickness and medicine, but a lot of the old information just doesn't change. So for me, the kind of person I am, once I said something, I didn't want to come back and do another episode saying the same stuff. So I kind of went from there to, I would make comments about trading, which is a lot of what I was doing at the time, and some questions. And so I did a few episodes about that stuff. And then I enjoyed having guests that I just found interesting, whether they were experts in some field or somebody I could just talk about the goings on of the world with. And then when I started pursuing comedy seriously, you don't make any money in comedy, just like in fighting at the lower levels. You know, you might get I would guess that there were a couple times that you got a purse for winning a fight and you actually lost money on it after you paid coaches and paid for all your food and
100%.
Yeah. So it's not becoming a money-making career unless you're that top percent. And so I have had to keep doing other stuff to pay my bills, and my schedule just got less and less flexible when the top priority was getting to the right comedy gigs. So I just had a hard time coordinating with guests. And I had a listener base at that point. It was probably close to 2 years ago when I really got into the monologues. So I wanted to keep putting content out for them. And at that time, I had wanted to make my content accessible to a wide group of people so I could, build the podcast listenership. But I kind of made the decision to try to speak to anyone that could follow what I was saying. And for lack of a better word, I think it was my smart listeners that caught on to some of what I was doing in the monologues. But most of it has like a satire or a dark humor twist to it. And I enjoy talking about world events. I get really frustrated by a lot of what goes on in the world and in politics, but I'm also like addicted to it in some way. And I find that it's much easier for me to process and not have some existential crisis if I make it into a joke. That's a lot of what my comedy is. So I've gotten really, really good feedback since I've started doing that. Obviously, some episodes are better than others. And then other people are like, I can't listen to your shit anymore. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, can you please go back to talking about fiber? Or tell me what the secret stock is that's going to make me $1 million. And so I just try not to worry about it. As a comedian, you've got to have a podcast in 2023.
Gotcha. Okay.
As a marketing tool, as something for people that enjoy you to experience, to kind of tide them over as far as them receiving more stand-up content or just waiting to be able to see you. Even the most successful comedian might show up like once a year, and in order to stay fresh in people's minds, it's a pretty important thing.
That's a good point. Well, your latest one was on the Beckham documentary on Netflix. And I gotta say, I thought it was awesome because it was a very different perspective. Because for me, you came, coming from America, when he got sent off in that World Cup game, I was 18 years old in college. So it brought back so many memories of my youth, and it was so nostalgic. But I was always into combat sports, so I was never into soccer. And for me, I didn't realize how good he was. I had no idea of the amount of titles he won. I had no idea of all the obstacles he faced with like difficult managers and all the just dealing with the press and the personal stuff and moving country with your family. And man, I have so much more respect for him as a person for what he overcame. But I love these documentaries on Netflix. There was just one I just watched last night on Christy Martin. She was like, do you remember her? She used to fight on the Mike Tyson undercards.
A boxer. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and I didn't know anything about her. I'd seen a couple of her highlights, and I knew she was a female champion. But looking at the documentary, it was just it humanizes these people. It's so easy to look at, especially you and I, we've been in martial arts a long time. You look at some of these elite athletes, whether it's a soccer player, whether it's a fighter, and they have a bad loss or a bad night, and you're like, oh, that they sucked or whatever it is. And you forget that, man, they're dealing with so much stuff behind the scenes, the human aspect. And that's the Christy Martin documentary. She was the female boxing champ, and she was married to a trainer who was physically abusing her and like knocked her out in the gym when they were sparring. Like it was just craziness behind the scenes. But you don't see any of that. You just see this woman on TV who's winning fights. And you're just like, oh, she's good at boxing. And it was, so for me, those two documentaries, especially the Beckham one, it just humanizes people. And it's made me way more compassionate for people that we look up to, or people that are at the elite levels in sports. And it's just, it was really, I felt like it was very refreshing. But I love your take, because your take was from an American who didn't grow up with it. And I really love what you said too. It was awesome. I highly recommend the documentary, and highly recommend that episode along with all the others the last 2 years since you've been doing your monologues.
The types of documentaries, especially the documentary series that we see on streaming now, are something that I really like. I think a parallel to them is the long form podcast. Other than, I don't know if you grew up with this, like probably not, but when I was a kid, the only place that you would see long form documentaries was on public television, PBS. Yes. And they would have stuff like Ken Burns, that kind of thing, but it was very rare, few and far between. And otherwise, you just got snippets, which are so much just marketing. And so I love that Netflix does that, and I'm sure other streaming services do quite a bit of it too. With the David Beckham thing, as an American and as someone that has never really given a shit about football, soccer, I wrote the guy off as, oh, he must be kind of good. It's good enough to play at a high level, but he's just good looking.
Yeah.
And within the first episode of that Beckham documentary, I was like, my goodness, like this guy was not only a prodigy, but had an incredible work ethic. And then as the documentary goes on, the amount of shit you see him dealing with that for me just doesn't make, I mean, you know, you're a fighter, and fighters that you support, you tend to stick with them win, lose, or draw. And the idea that you just turn on somebody for what to me seemed like nothing, and that wasn't the only time that happened to him in his career. It just was frustrating to watch. Not that he didn't ask for some of it, not that he didn't have some of that coming, but really completely changed my whole view on him.
Yeah, and the one thing I loved is he was such a hard worker. You know, his dad was obsessed with English soccer and then also Manchester United. So he was having him playing as a 3-4 years old, and just seeing the dedication he's had since he was a kid. I found that so refreshing, because I kind of thought the same thing. I thought he was just a talented guy who was good looking and he got some good opportunities. I didn't realize the amount of work, like everything that he got, all his accolades was due to his work ethic. I mean, it's just incredible. So I really love that. That's just such a good reminder for life, because you and I should know better, right? We're both, everything that we've accomplished that we're proud of was generally through hard work. But it's so easy to look at these people at the pinnacle of success, whatever it is, and forget that, you know, you kind of think, oh, it might be easier for them, or you forget that they just have the most insane work ethic. They outworked everyone from a young age, and they just never stopped. They had the same discipline for years and years and years of grind. And I just find that so refreshing, because I should know better, but I still forget, and I still look at people at the pinnacle of their success, and I forget that sometimes.
There's part of me that carries a victim mentality to this day, I think, even though I try to not acknowledge it at all at this point. But for instance, when I was a kid, I at times would be growing up around a bunch of kids much wealthier than me, and they might have this opportunity or have this object, and I would be jealous of that. So, oh, they're just getting this because they have this kind of parent or whatever. But as I've gotten older, and as I have gotten deep into some different pursuits, I've realized that is a complete waste of time. And I was just being a baby, because most of the people who are at the top of their games have gone through adversity and haven't had things handed to them. And it seems to be almost like a necessity, like it's a blessing to not have things come easily.
Brother, that's such a good, especially you're a comedian. Joe Rogan always talks about all the best comedians have kind of fucked up childhoods, or they've overcome adversity and struggle. And I think about that with my son. I'm like, man, I want to work hard and provide him love and everything. I will provide him the best for everything. But then I'm like, man, it's almost doing him a disservice, because you look at these kids from wealthy or successful parents, a lot of time they're complete fuck ups. And so like the only thing I can think about is you give them the adversity in a safe environment, which is jiu-jitsu and martial arts. I think that's just so good for kids to learn the pain and the struggle and the hardship and the discipline required through jiu-jitsu, especially when they're young. Otherwise, it's just, yeah, it's like, it's so easy for anyone to have the victim mentality, but I look at it almost like a superpower. Like if you've overcome that, then you're going to have that mental resilience to do great things. Whereas people that grew up with cushy use and they never really had any struggle, they get to a certain age and life kicks them in the face and they just crumble. And I think we saw a lot of that in 2020. So many people had not very much resilience.
Very, very well said. And that's, I have found martial arts, fighting, combat sports.
Yes.
Not just any martial art, but guys who really go in there and fight each other at the end of the day, to be such a metaphor for life. And you see so many guys who haven't been tested, but might have all the talent in the world, but they get into a tough fight that isn't finished in the first round, and then they crumble. And that other guy that might not have had the talent or the promotion was able to deal with that adversity, and then shows who's actually the more capable martial artist.
Yeah, 100%. Pat, can we go back to your chiropractor today? So the reason that I was thinking about going to chiropractor school was because I saw this chiropractor for this neck injury. I was young. I just moved to Chicago. I think I was 23. And it was Dr. Steve Archileo. I'm not sure if you know him. He has a place in Old Town. But I really liked him in the sense that he was like a real good tennis player. So he was like athletic himself. He trained all the time. He was older, he must probably early 40s, but he would always work out all the time. And he actually gave me a few books on chiropractic philosophy. And I don't know why he liked me and he gave me these books, but I saw him a couple of times. We just kind of hit it off and we were talking. And I read the books, and it was very much like, it wasn't just about you go in and they manipulate your spine. It was all about just a holistic approach to health. So literally the opposite of when you go in to see a traditional doctor and they just give you a bunch of pain pills, or they give you a bunch of, they just look at the symptoms, not the actual root causes. And he talked a lot about root causes of health and holistic approaches. And I love that so much, because I remember thinking I was so miserable in my training job, and I was like, man, what am I going to do with my life? And I love the idea of, I was at the time into boxing a lot and a little bit of jiu-jitsu. And I was like, I love the idea of this approach to health. And I know that you said about all the knowledge that you've gained over the years on health. And I there's a bunch of things I want to talk to you about, just health stuff. But what made you, I guess, want to, I don't know if you were just burnt out or you just wanted to change, or what was it that it wasn't doing it for you anymore? Because obviously there was an appeal in the beginning. Otherwise you wouldn't have gone through all the effort to get the degree in the first place.
I had a similar story in finding chiropractic to you. I think that's how they get you a lot of times, tongue in cheek. Their basic philosophy, I think they've got it right. I think anybody who has a holistic state of mind and treat the root cause of a problem, not the symptom, I think that generally speaking, that is the right way to go. What I personally found in chiropractic, as you get deeper into the philosophy and the approaches, is many chiropractors are not actually treating the root cause. They just have a very sophisticated way of explaining that their approach addresses the root. And many times that is not the case. And what I found when I got into practice was, in large part, it was a financial situation, in that getting a chiropractic education over the last 10 years, let's say you went to chiropractic school 40 years ago, you might have paid $5,000, $10,000 for your education, and student loans at that time were close to nothing as far as an interest rate. And when I went to school, and to this day, the cost of becoming a chiropractor is very similar to a medical doctor, talking hundreds of thousands of dollars at a 6 to 8% interest rate. And the reimbursement for chiropractors is nowhere near that of a medical doctor. So what happens to many chiropractors, not all, plenty of exceptions, but what happens to many is they get in this situation that I don't necessarily blame them for, where they need to talk people into a bunch of services that they do not need in order to milk an insurance company or charge them, or to create a perception that they're getting a deal by paying cash when really they're, again, paying for much more stuff than they need. And if you just do completely honest, precision, productive work in treating people, you can't pay the bills.
Nice.
And you're certainly not going to have like a high quality of life. And as I worked for myself and worked for a few different chiropractors, I had a spectrum of experiences that were negative, from being told that I couldn't give patients information about how to fix themselves, or I had actually gone back to school after becoming a chiropractor to study neurology, being told by a practice owner I could not share that information with people because they needed to get better very slowly, if ever, so that they could remain patients and their 36 visits that the insurance allowed for the year could all be used. Another chiropractor put me on the phone with one of his coaches, and I didn't know any of this ahead of time as far as taking jobs, but I was going to have to memorize and follow scripts, 3 different scripts for 3 different types of patients to sell them on our services. And that is just not me. And what I found was, more often than not, I would just do the right thing for my patients,
Right.
and not make the money that I should. We have a mutual friend who is one of the good guys, and he was the last person I practiced with. And that was a very good situation as far as chiropractic went. But the other factor for me was, most chiropractors are not going to make their money working with patients like yourself, somebody who's proactive, someone who's healthy. And I found myself, your bread and butter is somebody who's 150 pounds overweight, whose back hurts, and they are not going to change anything. And I got extremely frustrated caring more about people's health than they cared about, like themselves. And I would work long days, and often, instead of feeling like great about the people I would had helped, I would feel incredibly frustrated inside, just drained and angry. And I didn't have a bank account that looked like it was going to ever pay off my student loans, much less afford me like a lifestyle that would be a good consolation to feeling that amount of frustration. And I realized at a certain point that I had done all of the things that people had told me that I should do as far as becoming a successful adult. And I was good at helping people. And I didn't feel good about any of it. Like, I got no satisfaction. And I kind of looked at what I had in my life, and the only thing that gave me real satisfaction was martial arts. And when I left Chicago, I didn't really have, and there's way more to it that we probably don't need to get into today. But I didn't know what I was going to do with martial arts, but I wanted to go do that at the most rigorous level that my little pea brain could think to do, and see what happened with that as somebody entering their 30s. And in very unique ways, things kind of worked out, and I never had to return. I have yet to have to return to going into a chiropractic office every day to pay my bills and to, spend my work week.
What you said, Pat, about the costs going up so much and then kind of money corrupting them. A lot of chiropractors, obviously not the good ones, but I always think that so many things that the easiest explanation for fuckery is you follow the money trail. And
Yes,
I don't know if you've seen the oxycodone documentary, Painkiller.
Loved it.
Oh, incredible. I recommend that highly to everybody, because if you look at a lot of people that were skeptical on, like, are these vaccine companies doing good for humanity or are they not? There's a lot of people on both sides of that. It's like watch Painkiller and you'll see, you'll see these people, they do not care about anything. No, I'm sure there's people in these bigger bureaucracies that do go in for noble reasons and they care. But in general, the machinery of it, it's so profit motivated if you follow the money trail. And what you said just makes sense. We all know money corrupts. And if you're laden with debt as a chiropractor, and like you said, you can heal patients a little bit slower and make more money. Unfortunately, it's the money will corrupt a lot of people. You have to have, like you had the backbone to stand against it. And I'm sure that some people you work with weren't too happy. And it's crazy what you said about you were upset because you cared more about a lot of people's health than they did. And that's something I would never have thought about, but it actually makes complete sense because America the West in general is a fundamentally sick society. So if you really care about what you do and you have that excellence mindset like you do, then it would affect you when you're trying to help these people and you see they're not even helping themselves. I can't imagine something draining my energy more if I was in that situation.
You hit the nail on the head. The entire healthcare model of the United States is the profits all come from sick care. And if people do not remain sick, there is no continuous money stream. There is no cash flow. And I think that there need to be some fundamental changes for if that is ever going to be different. But it is what it is. And I'm just not, as long as I can help it, I'm just not going to participate in that. I talk a little bit, not too much, but a little bit about chiropractic these days in my comedy. And I've definitely talked about it on my podcast. And I will still get messages from chiropractors telling me that I shouldn't be talking about chiropractic or critiquing it. And my response is, well, how about you, a practicing chiropractor, reform and self-police your profession, and then I won't have anything to say, right? Because those problems won't still exist. And so I try to be pretty honest. And if something gets fixed, it gets fixed. I also, for the last few years, have been lucky that when I do something chiropractic related, got to be kind of careful how I say all that, but it's almost always only for people who are very motivated to get better, or motivated to utilize that input to their body or that information to continue to perform. And that feels much better for me, whether there's money tied to it or not.
So, Pat, when you moved to California, was it specifically because you wanted to leave the business? So it's always easier to make a transition if you just go to a different place, like a fresh start. And was it specifically to train with the Nate Diaz Academy? Was that one of the reasons?
That was the reason. There were a couple different directions, different places I was thinking about moving. The big draw to where I ended up moving was to go see what was going on with that team. Not exactly like a team you can just call on the phone and ask questions. You gotta show up and see if it works out and see if you can hang around and all that kind of stuff. So it was a huge leap of faith. But I also had always had a fascination with California. I had visited several times in my life, and I just loved most things about the state. At the same time, growing up, I got an odd messaging, which in retrospect isn't that odd, but originally being from the East Coast, that, only, these are just things I would hear as a kid, only rich people who don't have to work hard live in California. And like, you're not from that stock, so that's not really a place for you. And so I just kind of wanted to see what that was about and see if I really wasn't good enough to live in a certain state. And what I found is California has some of the hardest working, most competitive people in all industries. And the politics have their issues big time, in my opinion. But I deserve to be in a place that I enjoy, and I enjoy being out here. So if Team Diaz had been in North Dakota, might not have made that pilgrimage.
Right. Right. Yeah, there's something about California. Same with me. I'm from England and I love being in Chicago. But when I was competing a lot in jiu-jitsu as a brown belt, a lot of the tournaments were in Long Beach. And I would normally stay in these places like on the beach there. It's not a pretty beach, but I have so many good memories of like running up and down that Long Beach trail. And I used to think, man, I'd love to buy a little condo out here. Just something real simple. And then kind of in the winter when real estate's super slow, drive out with my dogs and my wife and just would spend a few months in the winters in somewhere in California. That was always a dream. And then I was kind of put off a little after 2020, just seeing the crazy politics and everything. And also the prices being so high and the taxes. And I was like, the dream's kind of shifted, but I see the appeal, like I really do. And like what you said about the weather's so great that it attracts a lot of people who are excellent in their field. And if you look at jiu-jitsu, it's probably got the most jiu-jitsu champions out of anywhere now. Probably more, even more so than in Brazil, because Texas has become a hub, but before Texas became a recent hub, it was all in California. So what you said is true. You can hate the politics, but there's no denial that there's a lot of excellence there, and there's a real draw to California.
Yes. Yeah, well articulated.
So Pat, when you first went there, are you a planner? Like, did you figure out, okay, I'm going to do this to pay my bills, or were you just like, I'm going to go and I'll figure it out when I get there?
I'm a hybrid. I worked a whole lot once my girlfriend and I decided to make the move, and saved up enough to live for 3 months, which is not in most people's mind like a safe base. We had started a cloud-based, a remote marketing company for the idea was for health and wellness brands. We ended up working with like Levi's and a couple of beer companies once it actually got off the ground. But the idea was to inject consciousness into your brand's DNA. And within a month of being in California, we got a lot of business. And it worked out that it could more than support us being out here. And what basically happened was, as the company got more successful, we had different opinions about what to do with it. I didn't want to grow it. I wanted to kind of keep it where it was and have time to really engage in the other aspects of life, and then have time to pursue the martial arts. And she probably rightfully wanted to keep it going and growing. And there came a time about a year in that she didn't want to be there anymore and didn't want to work with me. And she left California. And that's when I moved to a small apartment in Stockton. We were kind of living out in the country, out in the foothills near the Sierra Nevadas. And ultimately found my way to trading. But that's kind of how we did it. And then I left for 6 months, mostly for financial reasons at one point, like 6 or 7 years ago, but managed to claw my way back. And now I'm pretty stable.
Well, so I have a background in trading, and trading is so fascinating because most people can't understand what it's like. So, and it's only happened the last year before I changed careers. That's one of the reasons I changed careers. But to work all year and lose money trading is the weirdest feeling, because I remember thinking to myself, man, I could have gone to Australia, fucked around on a beach and just enjoyed life for a year, and I would be better off than being miserable and stressed for an entire year of trading. And a lot of people that just work for, day-to-day paychecks, they've never done something where you can actually lose money. It's a wild feeling. But the appeal to trading is the incredible upside too. So it's I'd love to talk a little bit about, because that's such a huge shift going from healthcare and being a chiropractor to being a trader. How did you decide on that? And how did you decide on what to start trading? And what was your strategy and how you're gonna, because the market is so efficient now, what was your niche or the way you were gonna try to make money trading?
Well, I had some mutual friends in Chicago that were floor traders, and I'd always been interested in it. I just have always respected what you guys do. And at a certain point, they had given me some books, which I didn't read at the time. And I ultimately did read. Um, but I needed something. I wanted something that would allow me to have the time and flexibility to train with my team when practice was happening. And that schedule is somewhat structured, but also not. It's definitely not your conventional, we've got class at 5 o'clock and you're out of there at 6 o'clock. Like your typical martial arts academy would be. I wanted to be able to take care of my dog, which I had adopted when I got out to California. And I had the risk tolerance from all of the chances I had taken in my life. And I spent a couple of months paper trading using the Thinkorswim platform. And my buddies I read the books, and then I would come with questions, and they got me to where it seemed like a safe thing to do an options trade with real money. And I didn't have much capital, which obviously, if you want to be successful in trading, you probably want a good amount of capital to start out with, like probably a non-negotiable. But with options versus stocks, I could have leverage to put on some trades with the little bit of money that I had left from the whole split and business breakaway part. And I started trading S&P 500 futures and SPX. And at the time, it was a very lucky period because the market just kept going up. So I started out trading like very conservatively with iron condors, and then realized, just generally speaking, going long and then, having a couple shorts to protect myself, let me do okay for a while. Of course, at a certain point, you're taking money out of your account to pay your rent and everything. And at a certain point, it just became unsustainable mentally, because I was always trading with pretty much all of my money. And I basically get close to having a heart attack before I'd even gone to practice each day. So I knew I was going to have to transition out of that ultimately. And after about 7 months, a few years ago, of, losing a couple $1,000s after that period of time in total, and I don't want to blow everything else that I have. So I backed out. At that point, I was trading, the main things I would trade were Tesla and Apple and the SPX.
So when you said you started your paper trading, so that's basically testing, people that are listening, that's testing your theories without actually putting on real money, as if you're trading and seeing if you'd make or lose money, but you're not actually doing it. And the big difference between doing that and then when you start trading is this, it's the emotions. It's trying to, if you have a trade going against you, it's, do I buy more and double down if I really believe in it, or do I cut my losses? And it's dealing with those emotions. I can see why that stressed you out, and it's so exhausting. You just reminded me of my first day when I first started trading the pit. So I worked for a company in England that sent me to Holland for a year, and I was still training. And then they sent me to Chicago, and I was having problems with my visa. So they sent me to New York, and I was helping out a desk because I wasn't on the trading floor. It was all electronic at that time. So they didn't know I didn't have my visa situation sorted out. Then they finally sorted out my visa, sent me back to Chicago. I got my floor badge. They put me in the trading pit, and they said, it was a team of 12 guys. And they said, listen, we don't want you to join the team because we all know what we're doing. And if we want to see if you can make or lose money. So you're going to have 3 months of your own position, and you've got to prove yourself. So I think I got my badge at 12:30, and the market closed at 2. And they put me in the pit, and there was a big order that came in. It seemed like there was money on my sheets. It was options, and I bought 150, and then the market moved against me. And so from 12:30, I did the trade at maybe 12:40. By 2 o'clock, I was down about 15 grand. And I remember thinking, Jesus Christ, I've been trading for an hour and a half. I'm 15 grand in the hole, and it took weeks to get out of that. It was just it's brutal. But I know when the last couple of years you had there was kind of the big bull market in crypto. Were you trading crypto at the time?
I learned a lot about crypto. I would buy different cryptocurrencies and hold them. I always bought what I was prepared to lose completely.
Mm.
And as time went on, I got probably my heaviest position was in Bitcoin. I still like Bitcoin. And I was one of those people that I think I lost the majority of my Bitcoin because I had it in Celsius and BlockFi. Yep. And it's gone right now. I'll get an email every now and then that says I'll get 15% of it back or something. But yeah.
I got some money in Celsius too, and it sucks. I think we're going to get a little bit back, but it's going to be pennies on the dollar. But I still the intellectual idea of Bitcoin, especially after 2020, when you saw all the shadiness at all the different levels of government, and that you see the way they treat our currency, and now starting all these wars, and they just keep printing more money. I don't have any faith in the Federal Reserve, and I think inflation's going to be here for a long time, and it's going to keep eating away at our money. And so I love the intellectual idea of Bitcoin. And this year I think it's up, it's doubled this year. It's the best performing asset of 2023. But it's just the problem is holding it is kind of a pain. So then you go to these platforms like Celsius and FTX, and then they do shady things. So it's very, very frustrating. I feel like you and I, we spent a long time in finance and learning about it, and yet we still made mistakes. And I always think about, I think about a single mom who works 2 jobs to survive with her family. And suddenly she can barely pay the bills because the price of food has gone up so much. The price of everything's gone up so much. And she has no financial education. She doesn't know what to do. Man, my heart really, really feels for those people. I think that the monetary policy and I just don't have any faith that the Fed are going to do the right thing in the long term. And history's shown that they tend to exasperate the boom and bust cycles of the economy. So I'd love to know your thoughts on money.
I've read Ray Dalio's books. I understand and accept the pitch that the world economy is debt-based, but you cannot tell me that the United States is handling its currency responsibly. I think there's a difference between $1 trillion in debt and over 33 trillion. And I just see it as completely corrupt. Not that it hasn't been for the majority of the life of this nation. But right now, my gut just tells me that unless something drastically changes, like we've set ourselves up for disaster. I understand the military industrial complex, but I do not see that as a sustainable way to create stability in this country. Especially when inflation's already out of control. I just don't see it. And I could see how the United States could remain a world power, but I don't see how it could remain a world power while maintaining like the tenets that has made America great, for lack of a better word, in terms of a strong middle class and people being able to work hard and do an honest day's work and be able to provide for their family. And I wonder if that's by design, if they're wanting to push us towards socialism and complete dependence on a government, or if these people are just that incompetent.
Yeah, that's a great question, Pat. So many people, the conspiracy theories, think there's a lot of things are by design. And I'm much more of the camp that I think it's just a lot of incompetence. And for those of you that haven't read it, Ray Dalio's latest book, The Changing World Order, it's a bit dry, but it's just there's so much good stuff in there. I mean, he's written almost like an academic book he's looking at all the great cultures through the last 1,000 years and all the signs of a rising and falling countries. And it looks like from all the metrics, we kind of peaked around the 90s or the 2000s, and now we're into the decline. And there's so many historic examples of when the currency starts to go, that's when the stability of the country, goes too. So yeah, it's very scary times. I mean, this isn't a financial advice podcast, but like if you were giving advice to say, a nephew or a cousin or someone close to you, and they came to you and they said, Pat, I know nothing about money. I'm really worried about, the future. Do you have any advice? Like what kind of things would you tell them?
Oh my goodness. I would tell them be very careful about any debt that you take on. I would tell them to be very careful about what they choose for their education and the choice of investment in college. If you're going to go get an engineering degree, probably a great thing to do. But if you're going to go get a liberal arts degree and think that that is going to give you a stable adulthood, you might want to look at going to being a plumber or something like that, where you can afford that education. I think that it's very hard in this society, but I would tell people to do their best to buy things they can actually afford. I think the average car payment right now is like $800 a month. And that's kind of gone parabolic as far as what people's income is. People are buying things that they cannot afford. And, in an economic downturn, and I remember very well the last real estate market crash. I was also alive for the .com crash, but I didn't really know what was going on there. But people get in trouble when they lose everything. I would probably tell them to try to start investing as early as possible. And if they can figure out how to get it into cold storage, maybe buy some Bitcoin. Like you're saying, for your average person to actually purchase those kind of assets and have them secure, it's really complicated.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I love what you said. So 2 things. I couldn't agree more. I always think if, my son's about to turn 3 and I'm thinking if he was 17, he was asking me for advice, should I go to college? It's crazy how much my opinion 5 years ago, I said, of course. And I've changed so much. Just seeing the cost of it and seeing the indoctrination in some of these colleges is crazy. And then also the use of some of these degrees. And I mean, listen, I got a bachelor's degree and then I got an MBA in finance. And I worked in 2 industries where you don't even need a bachelor's degree. I mean, I worked in trading and I worked in real estate, and you don't need degrees for either of those. And I think just almost giving him like a little bit of money and saying, hey, start a business with this and run that for a few years. You're going to learn infinitely more things. Unless it's a degree, like you said, like an engineering degree, a medical degree. So there's certain things that you still have to get degrees for, but there's just so much nonsense out there. So I love the fact you said that. I love the fact you said about living within your means, because the time that I did very well in my life was in my 20s, and it's because I was making good money trading. But my first bonus before I started my own training company, I used as a down payment for a 1-bedroom condo in Chicago. I stayed there 16 years. I didn't have a car for about 15 years, and I had no fixed costs. I had no debt, no fixed costs. So anything I made just accrued in my trading account. And I see the opposite with people where it doesn't matter. Even if they're getting promotions and their income's going up, if their spending's going up, they're just on that treadmill where they're not actually going anywhere. Their net worth isn't going anywhere. So I love that you said that. And then you said about investing, buying just real assets. Like I went to a wedding a couple of weeks ago, and my buddy had this real nice Rolex, and he doesn't have a lot of money, but he told me, he's like, I bought this for an investment and it's gone up 250% in however many years he had it. And it's like, I guess, that he knows a lot about watches, and he bought this specific model because he knew it was a good investment. And I would never even thought about that. But, just in a currency that's losing real purchasing power every year, just by buying any assets, whether it's crypto, whether it's property that isn't in a state that's got crazy property taxes, anything that's tangible, I think is just good advice.
Yeah. 3 points about what you just said. I feel like the experience of going and starting a business on a shoestring budget, even if the business fails, the amount that you will learn that's practical to life in 2023 surpasses most college educations.
Yes.
I think that there's so much value in that. I also, my time trading taught me more about economics than all of the economics classes I took in school. Taught me more about the way the world worked, made me way more interested in world affairs and politics, because I could see how that stuff was actually impacting the economy and impacting my trades. And for me, that made it a lot easier to learn. And so many people will go from making $70,000 a year to over $100,000 a year. Like you said, they immediately just start having a higher overhead for their life. And it amazes me how many people just continue to carry things like credit card debt instead of eliminating their debt and staying within their means and then preparing to make a wise investment or preparing for an economic downturn.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One of the reasons, it wasn't the only reason, but one of the reasons I left Chicago, moved to Northwest Indiana is because my property tax is something like a third of what I was paying in the city. Yeah. And I mean, you know, what are you paying all the taxes for when they can't even control the rampant crime on the streets? You know, there was four people were shot by one of my job sites, Pat, the other day at 2:00 in the afternoon, like a block away from one of my job sites. I'm just like, man, and it's just, you know, no one cares because it's not the right ethnic group shooting, you know, so there's barely any media coverage. No one cares. And I mean, this last mayor that Chicago just elected, it seems like he wasn't the best choice, but it's hard not to get frustrated. I remember watching a movie with my dad when I was about 8 years old, like an old Tom Cruise movie. And I remember walking out of the theater. I'm like, oh, Dad, that was amazing. What do you think? And he said, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And he kind of gave me this look and he said, Lawrence, he said, when you get to my age, he said, don't listen to me. You just get cynical as you get older. And now I'm a bit older. I kind of understand what he means, but it's impossible to get a bit older and have your eyes open to what's going on around you and not have some degree of cynicism.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, how do you deal with that, Pat? How do you deal with, you know, all this stuff in the Middle East, the Ukraine-Russia war, all the domestic problems? If you, like, I try and insulate myself from a lot of news because it does just get me down. Like, I'd rather read a book like Ray Dalio's book where I learn something than look at some latest headline about some kids getting killed and just get really depressed about humanity. So I don't have an answer. Like, do you have any strategies you do to stay positive and optimistic, but also still know a little bit about what's going on in the world?
Well, I've turned to comedy. I try to find the humor or the punchlines in what's going on. And I feel like our modern society, maybe it's always been that way. I don't know, but it seems more polarized than ever.
Yeah.
And so many people are unwilling to listen to another person's point of view. And I find that a room that is a comedy club, you have an opportunity to make both sides laugh. And when you change that emotion, it opens the window for them to listen a little and see someone else's side. I've had to be very careful with that because at the lower levels of comedy, it is very important to dumb down your humor and to include a lot of toilet humor and sex jokes and stuff like that, because that's what people want to hear. But when I get it right, I've been able to sprinkle in something that deals with a little deeper subject matter. And I don't know that that's going to do anything drastic, but it brings unity for a moment. And I feel like it's going to be hard for us as a nation or a world to make any productive changes without some increase in overall unity. Some more interest in compromise. Because you don't have that right now. And also for me within that, you know, this isn't helpful to anybody, it's just for me, but I have started to have some opportunities on like a much larger scale. Last weekend, I was able to open a show for Shane Gillis, who's a very successful comedian. And there was a sold out 1,500 person theater. And when you have an audience that is a little more invested in comedy and a little more invested in a specific comedian's voice, you have a lot more freedom to talk about things you actually care about. They're interested in going on that ride with you. So, hopefully, if I continue to progress, I'll be able to spend most of my time in those kinds of spaces and can get a little deeper into not even necessarily what I think, but what I notice about some of these issues, and get people to not only see somebody else's point of view, but maybe see some of the holes or the irony or the silliness in their own. I mean, that's what happens to me a lot as I'm working through material or thinking about something that might be a good subject for a podcast. Is I see my own flaws in my thinking.
Well,
That's I think helpful for me.
Well, Pat, I'm a huge fan of Shane, so kudos to you. That's awesome that you were an opener for him. What made you? Because I'll be honest, brother. When it's been a while, but when we were training together in Chicago, you always seemed a bit. You seemed like a intellectual. You seemed like a thinker. You didn't seem like the guy always cracking jokes in the locker room. You didn't seem like the person who was going to be a professional stand-up. What was it about comedy, and how did you decide to go all in on this? Because it's awesome. Like I remember when I first started seeing stuff about it, I was so impressed. I'm like, I just love people that do things unexpected and they have these huge changes. Chiropractor, professional trader, stand-up comic. These are such different things. So huge respect. But it was kind of, for me, it was out of left field.
I dealt when I was younger with a lot of trauma. I'm doing air quotes if you're listening to this on audio, and had a lot of periods of depression. And I didn't always have like the best support system. And one of the things that I would fall back on in retrospect was stand-up comedy, especially comedic. For instance, like Bill Burr is somebody that was very open about his pain and his flaws and examining that. And when I saw somebody doing something positive with their inner demons, that was really intriguing to me because my inner demons hadn't done much positive for me. They've all been things that I've needed to correct in order to progress in life. And a couple of years ago, I just started to get some injuries that were really making me be like, I'm not going to be able to be helping out and pursuing this martial arts thing for forever. And what am I going to do next? Am I going to end up back in the chiropractic office? Like what am I going to end up doing? What's going to work for me? It's stimulating because I was good showing up every day, a couple times often to the gym and doing that. But I just, who I am, I wasn't sure that I could go be in an office for 20 years. And because of some of the opportunities and experiences I've had with Nathan, I realized that it was possible for something really one in a million to happen. And for some reason, my brain kept going back to comedy, to stand up. I think I was extremely realistic about it. And that when I thought about giving it a shot, I just wanted to know, like, if I had talent, like if I could do it and if I could keep progressing. And if I couldn't, I wanted to get out of it right away. I didn't want to invest all of that time into something that was going to go nowhere. So I still have, points. All right, if I'm not doing this by this amount of time, then I need to wrap this thing up. And when I started, I hadn't talked to my teammates who are pretty much my main friend group much about my thoughts. I just one day was like, I'm going to go do this little comedy open mic thing. And I remember the reaction was, I got two reactions that really stuck with me. One, you don't even talk that much. You're gonna go up on stage and talk. And then I think it might have been Nathan that was like, you're the least funny person in our friend group. Like, how is this going to work? But I got up there and I realized that for whatever reason, and part of it is probably that I have had these different periods in my life where I've done real things. I have something to talk about. And I have a worldview and I have some idea about who I am, but I am good at it. And I'm good at creating jokes, which there's a bit of math and stuff like that involved in them. There are devices. There's a structure to it. It's not just off the cuff thinking of the funniest stuff. It's things that I can sit with. And right now, as far as the average comedian, I'm about 5 to 8 years ahead of where someone who's ultimately going to be successful ends up.
Mm.
So I'm just very lucky in how I've been able to progress and how I have been able to not blow it when I have gotten some good opportunities. And I think that the trading, but more the martial arts, being able to deal with pressure and almost embrace it. I mean, that's something that I've learned from my team and Nathan. You know, he wants the highest pressure situation to test himself. And we don't run away from those things. We prepare and we ask for those opportunities. And I think that's made it a lot easier for me to go deal with being terrified.
I love that, Patrick. I think one of the biggest things, the biggest superpower is to face your fears and be uncomfortable and keep moving forward and deal with the pressure, like you said. And I mean, it's amazing you're ahead of schedule. I mean, opening for Shane Gillis is huge. But also, the last podcast I just released was with my wife, and it was about therapy. And we were talking about how she changed careers in her mid-30s, and she had other degrees, and she was ladled with student debt, and she was really reluctant. And I would hear her on the phone with people, and I'm like, listen, you're a therapist. You may not have the diploma, you may not be getting paid, but you are a therapist. So this is your passion. This is what you're good at. And I convinced her to go back and change careers. And now she's so much happier she did. And we were talking about the fact that if you're a 22-year-old who's just got a therapy degree, but you haven't lived life, you can't even relate. Clients won't even relate to you. You won't know any, you won't even be able to give much advice. Comedy at the highest level is there's a real intellectual bent to it. And the fact that you're such an interesting guy, I mean, you'll do these solo podcasts and you'll say, you know, when I used to live in, you know, South Carolina, or you start talking about all this stuff. And I'm like, man, I didn't know anything about. I've listened to so many of your episodes, and you'll have a whole episode about some aspect of your life that I didn't know anything about, because you've done all these cool things and these interesting things. So all the years you spent in medicine, in trading, doing jiu-jitsu and MMA, it's only going to make you a more complex and interesting character, which you can translate to comedy. So I actually completely get that. And I think it's awesome.
Thank you very much. One other thing that comes to mind, and I mention it because I think it's useful to other people thinking about taking on something new, is a lot of the stuff we've talked about is very like self-motivated based stuff. Like if you're gonna trade, especially be a day trader from home, like you've got to be there for the bell every day. Nobody tells you to, but you've got to be there. If you're going to compete or train with high level martial artists, like you've got to improve, and you've got to do stuff that is more or less very boring over and over and over just to get that stuff and get that stuff cemented. And I know that I can work as hard as anybody at the craft of comedy, because you know, you go up there for a few minutes, and part of the art is making it seem very spontaneous, but that comes from hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of preparation. And I feel grateful to be able to sit down by myself and look at a computer screen or a piece of paper and do that work every day, where I know that a lot of my peers, and I imagine it is this way in many different industries, they're like reluctant to do that work. They just want to do the fun stuff. And then they fall behind. And being self-motivated and holding yourself to some sort of regimented, structured schedule really, really makes a big difference in starting something from scratch and progressing quickly.
What's one thing that's been so cool about Joe Rogan? Two things. He's done such a good job of spreading kind of jiu-jitsu and MMA, spreading the fact that it's such an intellectual sport from the early days to today. And he's done such a good job with his podcast and giving all these comedians platforms and talking about the art of comedy and all the work ethic. And I think he talks about that too, where you have these people that maybe they have a lot of natural talent. They're the funny guy and they're seen as a comedian, and they have that artistic side, but they don't have the discipline to work hard at their jokes. And he always talks about that. He always says what you're saying. He's saying the ones that put in the time are the ones that succeed in the end. And my two favorite comedians are Joe Coy and Bill Burr. I love them both. And Bill Burr, what you said is so true. He makes all these, I mean, he's so funny, but he talks about all these anger issues and when he loses it. And it's so funny because obviously there's a lot of, it's real. That's him. You know, he's dealt with all these issues, and he's made his comedy he's just basically taken his negative, which, I'm sure a lot of society sees his anger as a huge problem, and he's made it hilarious. And like you said exactly the same thing. You've taken some of the things that could be perceived as a negative, and you've made it funny. So it's awesome, brother.
Yeah, there's something very beautiful about that to me.
Yeah, it's very authentic. It's the opposite of you being forced to do something that you didn't want to do. Working for a chiropractor when they were trying to milk the patients, that must have felt so frustrating. And then you get to talk about whatever you want and try to craft how to make it funny. So I just think it's so awesome.
Hit the nail on the head.
And Patrick, one thing I want to say is the talking to you, it just reminds me, I think anyone listening to this, it's worth repeating. When you go through shit in life and you're so miserable, sometimes there's so many benefits. You might not see them at the time, but like all the stuff that you can bring forward in your comedy, all the things that make you a more complex person, all the crap that you've overcome, some stuff in your childhood, whatever it is, it's like it makes you a more complex person, which makes you more interesting, makes you a better podcast host, makes you a better comedian. And I just think that's such a good thing to emphasize, because a lot of people, if you're not where you want to be in life, that time isn't wasted. You're still learning things, even if you're just learning you can deal with absolute shit and keep moving forward one day at a time. And I think there's so much strength and inspiration in that message for me.
I think underneath all of that is whatever you're doing, if it works out for you in the end, you're able to carry with you an immense amount of gratitude.
Yes, exactly. If you haven't eaten shit so many times, you don't appreciate the good times as much. That's so true.
Yeah.
Listen, we don't have too much more time, but I do want to ask you, in terms of just health, so much about health. Are there if there was like a cheat sheet for something that the things you can do that provide a lot, that maybe that it's not too much investment, but it provides so much upside. So I'll give an example of something that I just recently got since I moved to a house as opposed to being a high rise. I got a plunge pool for my basement. And brother, I got it for health benefits, because you hear about all the health benefits, but I didn't realize all the happiness benefits that I get from doing it early on in my day. Just 3 minutes in that thing, I get out. I don't like the mornings. I don't like the cold. And by doing it, it just makes me so happy. And there's a noticeable increase in my happiness levels. And the one thing that I got out of it that I never would have predicted is 3 minutes when you're miserable goes by so quickly. And it always makes me think, Jesus, my life is going by quickly. I've got to appreciate every day, because when you're suffering and cold, 3 minutes it seems like it goes by in 20 seconds. For me anyway, it seems like it goes by very quickly. Then how much of my life am I missing? How much of my life is just going by? So that's something that for me is, a few minutes of my morning, and it's had such a lasting increase. But whether it's any tips in diet, any tips in exercise, any tips with fasting, is there a few things that you can share? Selfishly, I'd love to pick your brain on just, optimizing the health.
Stay hydrated. A lot of people get I should drink a lot of water thing. So much of our water is processed nowadays to the point that there's nothing in it, that you want to make sure that you're getting some electrolytes in all that water intake so that you can use it. But staying well hydrated improves your athletic performance, it improves your well-being, and it improves your ability to detoxify yourself. Eat whole foods. Not only, gotta be happy, but people eat so many nutrient deficient, calorie dense foods that make it impossible for them to be at a healthy body weight, that eating more whole foods will increase your nutrient density and lower the amount of calories you're actually eating in the same volume of food. And that takes care of so many diet issues that people have, because so many people just eat the wrong way, and then they try to eat the right things, but they're hungry because they're just not eating that much food. Spend time not having any carbohydrates almost every day, whether that be intermittent fasting or doing like protein and fat or fat only meals for some of your meals each day. One of the big problems for people as they age is their insulin system wears out. You get less efficient at processing carbohydrates. You get more efficient at depositing body fat. And worst case scenario, you end up with diabetes. And by avoiding carbohydrates through a certain period of your day on a regular basis, you're able to keep that system calibrated, which allows you to make better use of the carbohydrates that you do consume. And I personally think that most people are going to do better, especially in terms of their athletic performance, having some carbohydrates in their life. I know it's very trendy right now to be keto or to go carnivore. And I think that there are some evolutionary trade-offs with that. There are some benefits, but for most people, they're probably going to enjoy life better if their diet is a little more balanced. Pick up something heavy on a regular basis. That doesn't mean going to the gym and powerlifting. That could mean doing yard work. That could mean carrying your kid. That could mean taking the stairs. Weights certainly do that. Jiu-jitsu in many ways certainly accomplishes that. But that will allow you to not lose bone density and lose your ability to resist gravity as you get older. And that's the thing that takes so many people out. And going into that, I think that in general, people should have a little tougher or more stoic or more pragmatic view on when things go wrong in life. And what I mean by that, as far as relating, is a lot of people are like, I don't want to go do a strenuous exercise because I don't want to hurt my knee, or I don't want to get this injury, or I don't want to get arthritis. And most injuries that we have in 2023, we will heal from. And if we can't heal from them, we can get very good surgical procedures to fix. The thing you can't fix is your bone density. The thing you can't fix is your ability to maintain your balance as you age. And so many people, and this was just so blatantly apparent to me as a chiropractor, they won't feel good. Something will hurt, or they will have an injury, and they shut everything else they're doing that was good for their health down until they feel better. And people would benefit from working through more pain and dysfunction and trying to check as many boxes as they can each day in terms of movement and positive thinking and healthy eating. And in turn, develop a better relationship with pain. And when you develop a better relationship with pain, pain doesn't hurt as much. And of course, there's a fine line to that, in that if you just ignore all pain, whether it be physical or mental, you start to develop some other issues. You become what Bill Burr once was on the inside. You become very angry, or you'll ignore something that you should have fixed in your knee at a certain point, and it'll just derail everything. But 99% of the time, we can get done everything we need to get done every day, whether we have a headache or our ankle hurts or whatever it may be. Like you can work through that stuff. And in the same vein of what you were saying earlier, doing things like sauna or a cold plunge, which I know are really trendy right now, but they help you develop a better relationship with adversity. But it's almost like a simulation. It's almost like paper trading, in that, nothing bad is going to happen sitting in a sauna for 20 minutes or sitting in the cold plunge for 3 minutes. You're not dealing with the same existential fears that someone might have doing something out in public or at their job or whatever it may be. But you change that mindset of embracing that difficulty and saying, well, we're just going to work through this, and I'm going to be better for it. And having those little practices, those little meditations, that kind of stuff, I think is really, really positive. I think that a few years ago, meditation became really cool, and so many people interpreted that, not wrongly, but as I need to sit somewhere and hum a mantra for 20 minutes. And we forget that so many things that we are doing outside of that in life are meditations. You get in that cold plunge and you focus on your breathing, you're meditating. You go in and you train jiu-jitsu, or you go spar somebody. On a certain level, you're meditating. So much of that device is focusing on a singular thing and blocking everything else out. And that's just a really, really healthy process for humans, especially in 2023, when we have social media and we have our phones, and it's easy to go through a day never just focusing on one thing. Having those practices in place that can kind of recalibrate, I believe, is going to have like a trickle down effect to help every other process in your body, help your blood pressure, help your thought processes, help the way you metabolize sugar, because you'll decrease the amount of cortisol that your body releases, which affects your metabolism of sugar and depositing it as fat and blah, blah, blah.
Man, there was so much wisdom there. Thank you, brother. And I really love what you said about having a better relationship with pain, because that just reminds me again of that painkiller documentary. Is so true. Like trying to hide from pain is not the solution. And pain tells you you're alive, man. I love that. Pat,
I know you can relate.
We'll have to do part 2 soon. I'm really excited for you. I think there's going to be amazing things coming in your stand-up career. And it's so cool to be talking to you now at this stage where you're not beginner. You just, you're open for Shane Gillis. So you've got some great markers, and like you said, you're ahead of the game, but you're still relatively new. And I just listened to Joe Rogan a few days ago, and he was talking about how he's like, man, I feel like I'm the best I am, and I'm 54. So that's the thing, is it's something that you can keep growing. One thing that I love about martial arts, but it's kind of depressing about combat sports, is it's a young person's game. And as you get older, most people tend to peak, if they're lucky, in their mid to late 30s. A lot of people earlier than that. So it's so cool that you're all in on something that you're doing well at, that the ceiling is, you've got decades to keep working and getting much better. So I'm just, I love your podcast. Everyone listening should check it out, Patrick Eley Show. And I'll put links on the show notes. But man, I really appreciate you. And I know we don't talk all the time, but I've been watching your journey the last few years, and it's been inspirational for me.
Right back at you. Thank you.